Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 794. I'm Tom Kegley, your host today. The podcast features our conversation with Nick Schrock. Nick and I discuss data engineering, AI, entrepreneurship. As the founder at Dagster Labs, Nick has the perfect standing to talk about three of the hottest topics in 2024. A little bit about Nick. Nick is the founder and CTO of Dagster Labs. There's a story about why he's not CEO. We talk about that in the podcast. He pursued his passion for working on engineering pain points after hearing that data infrastructure was a big issue. He founded Dagster to address this issue, highlighting how quickly open source projects are able to make an impact at legacy companies. Dagster couldn't come at a more critical time as data and ML engineering are beginning to drive both human and business decision-making. Are you ready to talk data engineering? It's time for the interview. Nick Schrock, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let's actually start at a level that's probably really basic, and that is, let's lay some groundwork. What is data engineering?
What is data engineering? Well, first of all, maybe I should introduce myself to the audience.
Sure.
Yeah, my name is Nick Schrock. I'm the founder and CTO of a company called Dagster, Dagster Labs, which is the company behind Dagster, and it's a framework for building data pipelines that targets data engineers, which is why Tom asked me that question. So, what data engineering is the practice of designing and building software for collecting, storing and managing data. So that's a really broad term. Another way to think about it is it's the subspecialty of software engineering that is responsible for managing and manipulating data once it lives outside its original system of record. So what I mean by that is that you have data in operational databases, which is like what backs an application. And then kind of what typically happens when you move it to a warehouse for analytics or machine learning is that you're copying that data to a different spot where it's no longer in a system of record. And then once you're there, you have to write software using different tools and techniques. And that's generally called data pipelining. Data engineering, again, is the designing and building software for collecting, storing, and managing data. We actually think of it as there's lots of titles in this domain. Like some people call themselves data engineers, some are ML engineers, some are analytics engineers. We really conceptualize data engineering as a craft that crosses roles. So, for example, we're going to get into ML, machine learning. A big part of an ML engineer's job is doing data engineering, doing data pipelining is effectively what offline training is. And so that is data engineering. You can think of it as if you're building data pipelines or helping other people build data pipelines, you're a data engineer.
With the word engineering and the word craft, that almost sounds like two very different things.
I don't think so. I mean, it's funny. One of our company values is respect the craft. And, I really conceptualize engineering as like a discipline or a craft where at least I do, where you deeply care about tools you use. You build things you're proud of. You really understand deeply the process. But I guess it kind of depends on how you define the word craft.
Right. So, I know people who are from the UK who the word engineer means that you've passed X number of tests, have a heavy mathematical background, and the word engineering actually comes with a ton of baggage to it. So the word craft sounds like it is less structured than something that's engineered. But that's neither here nor there. Once upon a time in my life, I actually built expert-based systems. And, they weren't machine learning. They did do some interesting trading things. the whole idea of data engineering, whether it's, building data lakes or data warehouses, things like that, is that something that's relatively mature, or is that still emerging and evolving in the industry?
It is absolutely emerging and evolving. And I guess that connects to why I started the company in the first place. Prior to working on Dagster, I was an engineer at Facebook from 2009, 2017. And kind of what I'm best known for that period of work is I was the co-creator of a technology called GraphQL, which ended up being a broadly adopted technology used by application developers. And, when I went and I was figuring out what to do next, once I left Facebook, I was asking companies across the valley and outside the valley what their biggest technical liabilities were. On the engineering side, what was preventing them from moving their business and their mission forward. And consistently, no matter the maturity of the business, what domain of the business, I just kept on hearing data and ML engineering over and over again. And when I dug into it, I found what I like to call the biggest mismatch between the complexity and criticality of the domain and the tools and processes to support that domain that I've ever seen in my career. So the only thing that came close was full stack web development, say around 2008, 2010, where the demand, people wanted to have more sophisticated front end applications in the web browser, but the tooling ecosystem and the quality of the browsers were completely overwhelmed. And it was an extraordinarily hostile development environment. Data engineering feels like, and still feels to some degree, there's been a lot of progress in the last 5 years, but it still feels like it's in that state to some degree. The lineage of data engineering kind of isn't software engineering, even though I consider it a software engineering discipline. Historically, it was kind of almost a lower status job, which doesn't make sense, by the way, but it just is what it is. And frequently it was offloaded to consulting shops, and they'd kind of bring in lower skilled workers to use tools like Informatica, and they try to make it all drag and drop, and so that you could commoditize the labor. And people got away with that in a world where they were just doing analytics on a single kind of data set, and it didn't need to be in real time. It didn't have to be compute. Maybe they were producing reports once a month, and the world changed where data became instrumental to ML, to the operations of data themselves. It, being data driven or data informed, depending on your preferred phrase, became table stakes for organizations of all sizes. So it needed to switch over to become a software engineering discipline. And I think on the scale of things, given the size and importance of the ecosystem and the complexity of the problems they're trying to solve in data engineering, it's still relatively early on that journey.
So if it's that early in the journey and, that void is still there, how do you, as someone who's, instrumental in creating a business, how do you stay up to date? How do you stay current? And then how do you keep your organization current?
I guess that's a question of current with what in some ways we are, our org and kind of the peer companies in our space are defining what's current, right? We're building the next generation of tools. We are on the ground working with our users and customers who are typically kind of the leading edge in their field. So, we have a Slack community with almost 10,000 people in it who are interacting and asking us questions, and we're solving problems along with them. So me and my team are doing kind of hand-to-hand combat every day with our user base, actually seeing how they're solving things on the ground. So I think it would actually be impossible to work at Dagster Labs and not stay current, just because we're in the arena, as the phrase goes.
When do you see it maturing? At what point does this flatten out and become just sort of the norm, that sort of base that organizations all suddenly either know or then know and start shoving off to the low-cost provider?
Well, I don't. To me, the measure of maturity is not shoveling off to a low cost provider. The measure of maturity is where I really visualize the journey that the front and web development kind of ecosystem has developed over the last 10 years. And I think what does maturity look like? There's a stable set of technologies that are considered standards that people build on, and then a really thriving ecosystem around those technologies where you have a huge store of experts that work in it, and you can kind of have standards, and labor is more fungible between the different companies, and everyone kind of has a shared understanding of like what are best practices. And then the ecosystem starts compounding. So people build new tools that stack on top of each other, and there's kind of this momentum that goes over where people feel like instead of drowning in complexity, they're moving the state of the art forward in a sustainable manner. That's all the things I just said are very not measurable. It's more of a vibe. But I think that we can safely say that data is not there yet. And I think the other measure of this is there a playbook that exists where a well-run company can tackle the problems in a particular engineering domain in a way that is very repeatable and sustainable. Again, the analogy to front end, I feel like front end is actually in a pretty stable spot. If you're like a company and you're building a bunch of internal apps or a website, you staff up a team, they use React and other modern web tools, kind of a set of standards people can get around. And, engineering teams kind of are quite, there's a stable set of tools where they can build applications, and it's not very technically risky. You don't hear about projects where like someone tries to build a website and then it all falls apart. That just doesn't happen. But that happens all the time building data platforms. And I think it's still considered a technically risky thing to do where there's very uncertain outcomes.
Why is it so risky?
It's risky insofar as it has a high probability of failing or not getting the outcome that people set out to deliver. Like Gartner has these surveys, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, where they're like 70% of data initiatives fail, and it's pure, a lot of it is just pure engineering execution. It's just extremely hard to enable and build an internal data platform at a company that ends up working for all the stakeholders and everyone feels is sustainable. And they end up producing high quality, timely data on time for all their different use cases.
Is that purely technical, or is that because people tend to define what they want really in a fairly muddy way?
I mean, it's almost impossible to generalize, but I think it is.
Of course.
I think I think there are often organizational misalignments that cause this to be problems where, the data people don't build the thing that actually the business stakeholder needs, and there isn't a fast feedback loop between them, and then there's miscommunication on that. But I'm a big believer that better tools kind of can really move not just technical progress forward, but also solve those alignment problems. So if you reduce time to value for data engineers, for example, who are building data pipelines, and they're able to very, very quickly iterate and get kind of their initial work in front of the users who care about it as soon as possible. And then they can quickly iterate on that based on user feedback. That solves the organizational problem of communication and whatnot. So, with better tools, you can build what you're going to build more quickly, or get to an intermediate milestone where there's intermediate value, and then iterate with your customer, your internal customer. And so that's a thing where a better tool allows for lighter weight process, which then allows for faster feedback loops, which to me is fast feedback loops are utterly essential to building high quality software that actually ends up being useful.
I think that's regardless of type. I think I would throw in with that opinion pretty easily. Nick, you were an engineer. You are an engineer. How does one go from being an engineer to basically starting and being one of the forces in a company? Can you still be an engineer at the same time that you're growing a company?
Well, it's a question dear to my heart because I went through quite a journey here where I started the company by myself, in 2018. I didn't hire my first full-time person until 2019. And I really do consider myself an engineer. It's like, that's what I'm trained to do. It's how I conceive of myself. But I was a solo founder CEO for a long time there. And, I was able to stay technical for a while. But once we got to, 20 people, 15 people, especially in an all remote context, like I didn't have the bandwidth to do any technical work. I actually transitioned back to CTO from CEO about a year ago. I had hired a head of engineering, a guy named Pete Hunt, who actually co-created the React project, but he had gone on to be the CEO of a software company that scaled and sold to Twitter. And I was able to convince him to come join me as head of engineering. And then I ended up making him CEO, and I moved aside to CTO. And that happened about a year ago. And so I've been, now he administratively runs the business, and I'm focused on technology and product. So, in effect, like I maneuvered it so that I get to be an engineer again. So I still code quite a bit. I work a lot on product marketing, content, product work, but yeah, it's challenging. I mean, kind of connects what you're saying before about this craft versus engineering stuff. I consider engineering, doing good engineering, software engineering, it's much more analogous to writing than like a physical engineering job. Software engineering is a creative process. And so it's very difficult to stay in the headspace of being an administrator and a manager and being a truly effective software engineer. When you're operating in the domain of software engineering, where you're thinking creatively, you're thinking about novel solutions to problems, you need to be like thinking about it in the shower in order to really bathe enough in the problem to solve like the really meaty stuff. So I found it very difficult to, be having to switch modes about like, okay, now I'm managing the marketing team. Oh, now I'm managing the sales process. Now I'm designing a compensation system. And then switching back to engineering, which requires like, all of your focus. So it is certainly challenging.
How did you come to that conclusion? I've talked to people recently that it took them a long time to realize that there were things that they wanted to do, or they had to actually bring in other people to actually do those roles. They couldn't do them all.
Well, I think I knew I couldn't do everything. It's like there's practical issues. You have to recruit the right people. You have to, convince them to join you. Until you do that, you have to do the job yourself. Yeah, I really flipped my bit on that once Pete joined the company, because it was just clear he was way better operationally than I was. He thinks more, but he's more thoughtful about people management. He had scaled the sales process already. He had scaled a marketing process. So yeah, I would just always go to him for advice. And then he'd ask me questions, and that in a way where I was like, wow, I should have really been thinking about it like that. And then, I was also like having personal challenges with the job. Is like being CEO of a venture-backed startup is like extremely stressful. Especially also when you have two little kids at home like I did. So, definitely playing on hard mode for the last 4 years. So it just kind of became increasingly obvious that Pete should run the company. And I have long contacts with him. I've known him for like 10 years, and there's mutual trust. And, I was honored when he accepted the offer to become CEO.
Has the vision for Dagster changed over the 4 years as you've grown and scaled?
So it always changes. I still think that the core mission is has remained relatively stable insofar as like, one, it's clear that data engineering and the data ecosystem needs a revolution in tooling. And two, that orchestration is the critical leverage point for a number of reasons why that is the layer where that should happen. So that insight has been constant since 2018. Certainly, as time has gone on, we've learned, understood the problem better, changed the way that the products worked. We've expanded scope to some degree. We've changed our approach a little bit, but that original mission still remains for sure.
I think that's probably made it easy to press forward. I talk to a lot of startups or medium age startups that have pivoted multiple times. And that seems to be obviously very stressful. Luckily, you haven't had to go down that path. A lot of my listeners who are either looking to go down the path that you have or have just started, what keeps you up at night today? 4 years in, what keeps you up at night?
Well, it changes over time. Things have been actually going very well at the company for the last 3 to 6 months. So what's more keeping me up at night is less about some sort of impending doom.
Good.
So that's good. Yeah. And I'm not just saying that as a line, because historically, if you asked me, 18 months ago about that question, it would have been about an impending doom. And now it's more about getting concerned about how are we going to scale the org? How are we going to continue our momentum? What's going to break next as we're growing so quickly and gathering momentum? And, you're kind of entering, you can talk to other people about what's going to happen as you grow your business and grow your team, but there's only so much advice is generalizable. And there's every business and set of people is unique. So that's what really is keeping me up at night. But, it's an exciting time at the company. So things are going pretty well.
Teams are a big part of building software. Are teams a mechanism that you use to build software, or are you running with a bunch of highly disciplined individuals?
No, teams are absolutely essential. Teams are, we were talking before the podcast started, I'm from Michigan, and Bo Schembechler was a football coach. And he's like, there's 3 things that matter: the team, and the team. And that is certainly true in software. Building complex software is a collaborative act. And so the notion that you don't think in teams it's so foreign to me. I wouldn't even consider it. Teams are utterly essential to how we develop.
We talked earlier that the vision for Dagster has been pretty laser focused, some tweaks along the side. Teams, how does that vision then get inculcated into new teams as you form them?
Yeah, so we probably reorg the company every 6 months. And in terms of, the company is very, and I'm thinking mostly in terms of the engineering team and the product teams, because that's the stuff you reconfigure a lot. Sales and marketing are pretty well understood, process heavy functions. There's a very standardized playbook. Software is much more loose in terms of you can construct whatever you want, reconfigure it however you want. And you want to configure your teams to be aligned with business objectives as much as possible. So we very much think of it in terms of a top-down approach where we think about what are the business outcomes we want to achieve. And then we think about how to align teams so that they are accountable for those business outcomes. So just as an example, right, we had 3 pillars. I forget, 6 months ago, it's we need to mature our cloud business. we need to expand the orchestration category, and we need to reduce the number of concepts that are necessary to learn to take Dagster to production. And as a result, we have a cloud solutions team, we have a beyond orchestration team, and we have a essentials team, we call it. And that has been the team structure for the last 2 quarters. It'll be the team structure until the end of this quarter. And then almost certainly next year, we will do an exercise to reshuffle our objectives and reorganize the organization.
Nick, if you woke up tomorrow morning, someone handed you whatever your caffeinated beverage of choice is when you roll out of bed, a magic wand, and 2 wishes that you could use to change any 2 things in the world of data engineering, what would those 2 things be and why?
2 things in the world of data engineering and why? That is a good question. It's very broad, so I'm struggling to actually kind of tighten it up a little bit. I guess I'm very excited for data and data engineering to become less considered this off to the side discipline and more integrated with the broader software engineering organization. There's this historical kind of hangover where oftentimes the application developers kind of execute without thinking about how the data will be used downstream for analytics and machine learning and other productionization. And that doesn't actually make any sense because analytics and feedback loops are a critical part of the development process. ML is increasingly part of how the core application works, et cetera, et cetera. And I am excited for the data engineering and data platform kind of capabilities to be integrated with application developers more. You know, there's often like you get asked like, is data engineering software engineering? And my answer to that is like, well, yes, it's a subspecialty of software engineering, but increasingly all software engineers are going to also have to be data engineers to some degree, because a team building an application should be accountable for ensuring that their application, the analytics work, and that any downstream ML that's done that feeds back in the application is also owned by them.
Nick, this has been absolutely fantastic. How would people continue the conversation? How would they find out more about Dagster?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, Dagster.io. You can type Dagster into Google. Our SEO ranking is good. From there, you can, it's an open source tool, so you can download it onto your machine. If you're a Python programmer, pip install Python. There, you can check out our documentation. We have a Slack community that you can link to from Dagster.io, which is very active. We have nearly 10,000 people on it. My entire team's on it all the time. And so, yeah, that's how you found out about Dagster.
Thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation. I think we covered some ground that wasn't on my hit parade to actually cover to agree. But that's why conversations are generally much more fun than a static list of questions. Nick Schrock, founder at Dagster Labs, thank you again for spending time with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Thank you. It was great.
Stop Project Chaos, the ultimate guide to predictable work intake. Mastering work intake is here. Are you feeling overwhelmed by endless tasks and unpredictable deadlines? You're not alone. But what if you could transform your project into a well-oiled machine, delivering consistent value on time? Introducing Mastering Work Intake from Chaos to Predictable Delivery by Thomas M. Cagley Jr. and Jeremy Willits. Link in the show notes to buy a copy of the book. You will not be unhappy with your purchase. But if you're ready to commit to not letting bad work drag you down, invest in your success, and learn how to master work intake for a smoother, more rewarding project experience. Join our cohort-based workshop. The first cohort is starting March 1st on Maven. Details in the show notes. We'd love to have you. We'd love to see you participate. In Reread Saturday News, Actionable Agile Metrics, Volume 2, Advanced Topics and Predictability, Chapter 8, Shatters Myths. Once upon a time in a land far, far away, I believed in a few of these myths. Okay, it was just about 5 years ago that I was dissuaded of my last of the myths in this chapter. I believe that many of my misconceptions are founded in the collision of words between classical statistics and words that Shewhart used for process behavior charts. Link in the show notes to this week's installment of Reread Saturday of Actionable Agile Metrics Volume 2 and all previous installments in this reread. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast 795, why do teams, products, projects, and companies exist? We'll also have a visit from Susan Parente, who brings her Not a Scrumdimentalist column to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?